Greetings, friends. You are on Ruslan Belov's channel, and today we will take a detailed look at the current situation in Ukraine as of January 5th, 2026. Over the past 24 hours, a truly large number of significant and telling events have taken place, so I suggest that, without unnecessary introductions, we move straight to the analysis. We will begin with the topic of mass strikes, since it appears that the Russian side has begun preparations for another large-scale wave of firepower. From early morning, pro-Ukrainian information resources started publishing a map showing the presumed flight routes of Russian unmanned aerial vehicles, as well as missiles of various types. According to these data, ballistic missiles of the Kinzhal class were most likely used, and the use of Iskander systems cannot be ruled out either. Of course, hundreds of drones were also involved in the strike. This scheme was made publicly available, and if you look at it carefully, the first thing that immediately stands out is that the main concentration of strikes fell on the northeastern part of Ukraine. In fact, the strikes were focused precisely on this region, and this is primarily due to the fact that it is from this territory, from this area, that strikes into the depths of the Russian Federation were previously carried out, are being carried out now, and with a high degree of probability will continue to be carried out in the future. Based on this, it can be assumed that on the eve of the attacks, quite serious forces and assets were concentrated in this area. Possibly cargo trucks, special platforms and equipment for launching drones, as well as other elements necessary for organizing strikes against Russian territory. After the Russian side apparently identified these targets, retaliatory strikes were launched against them almost immediately. Thus, over approximately the last 24 hours, we observed a kind of exchange of strikes, a sort of limited aerial firefight. After some time, the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense reported that during this attack by the Russian Federation, a total of 174 aerial targets were used, including missiles and unmanned aerial vehicles. According to the Ukrainian side, approximately 137 of these targets were intercepted and destroyed, although it is also officially acknowledged that there were hits. If we talk about the results of these strikes and the consequences of the impacts, at the moment, there are extremely few photos and videos available in open sources. Nevertheless, explosions have been reported in Chernihiv, as well as explosions in the Kiev area. In particular, an image is circulating which, according to sources, shows the aftermath of a strike on a certain medical clinic, presumably a private one, within the city of Kiev. However, the activity did not end there. After the main wave of strikes was completed, throughout the day there continued to be reports of new arrivals and repeated attacks in areas of settlements located at the junction of the Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhzhia regions. Strikes were also carried out against Zaporizhzhia and Dnipro. A large number of video materials dedicated to these episodes appeared online, but at the moment not all of them have been processed and analyzed, so it cannot be ruled out that additional and more detailed information will emerge in the near future. Overall, all of this strike activity indicates that in the very near term, new actions by the armed forces of the Russian Federation are possible, potentially on an even larger scale. The weather factor should also be noted separately. According to available information, extremely severe frosts are expected in Ukraine in the coming days, with temperatures dropping to as low as -22 degrees Celsius. This circumstance may also be significant, since such weather conditions are often used as a factor for intensifying certain military actions. It cannot be ruled out that either during this period or immediately after it, the intensity of strikes by the Russian army will increase. At the same time, a large amount of interesting and important information is coming today from Kiev. In particular, information has been finally confirmed that the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, is dismissing the head of the Security Service of Ukraine, Vasyl Malyuk. Let me remind you that in the Russian Federation, he is recognized as a terrorist or extremist. As of today, he is officially leaving his post. For those who may not immediately recall who this figure is and what events he is associated with, let me remind you. Throughout 2025, it was the SBU under his leadership that conducted an operation known as Spiderweb. We are talking about those very episodes when Ukrainian drones were launched from cargo trucks in various parts of Russia and carried out strikes on aircraft of the Russian Federation's strategic aviation. At that time, this person was directly heading the agency responsible. He has now been replaced by another official, whose name is also already known. As we can see, this is far from the first serious personnel reshuffle in Zelensky's inner circle. Just a few days ago, information appeared that Kirilo Budanov had left his post as head of Ukraine's military intelligence and was appointed head of the presidential office. Thus, he moved away from a purely military position toward a political role. As for the future fate of the now former head of the SBU, it is still unclear what position he will take or where he will be assigned. However, the very fact of such decisions is of great significance. We are observing how Zelensky, albeit in a rather specific manner, is attempting a radical reboot of the top leadership and is effectively cleansing the political and security establishment of the country. First, Yermak left his post, then the head of intelligence, and then the head of the SBU. All of them are leaving military or quasi-military positions. In their place, a new managerial layer is being formed, new leaders and heads of key Ukrainian agencies who, in essence, conditionally speaking, are clean from the point of view of Russian legislation in terms of involvement in terrorist or extremist activities. Thus, we see the formation of a new Ukrainian ruling elite, which at least formally and legally can be considered a legitimate counterpart for potential negotiations with the Russian Federation. As of now, these individuals do not have high-profile criminal cases, accusations of terrorist activity, or similar allegations attached to them. And this is indeed an important point. Apparently, this personnel purge is being carried out precisely for this purpose, to create a maximally white and legally clean ruling elite. All new figures are taking up their posts, and most likely a bet is being made on abandoning diversionary and underground activities in the future. Accordingly, it cannot be ruled out that in parallel, some preparation for a possible negotiation process is also underway. Of course, all that remains for us is to closely observe how these reshuffles will affect the overall situation within Ukraine. Attempts at internal resistance are also possible. Previously, information appeared that some officials refused to leave their posts, citing the need to complete a number of ongoing operations. According to various sources, this provoked an extremely harsh reaction from Zelensky, up to outbursts of rage and intense irritation. As a result, according to those same sources, under direct pressure from the President of Ukraine, certain individuals were nevertheless forced to vacate their positions. Such information is usually disseminated by channels claiming to possess insider knowledge from Kyiv. How accurate this information is will be shown by time. In any case, we will continue to closely monitor the development of political processes in Ukraine. Now let us move directly to the front line. Today, a large number of important changes and clarifications have been recorded there, so I propose that we examine them in as much detail as possible. We will begin with the Zaporizhzhia direction, where the Russian Federation, judging by everything, is either continuing or effectively unfolding and intensifying the so-called Orikhiv offensive, which is currently developing along two operational axes, the Western Orikhiv and Eastern Orikhiv directions. If we speak about the Western Orikhiv sector, then as of today, a number of pro-Russian sources report that units of the Russian army have managed to improve their tactical position southwest of the settlement of Novoyakovlivka. This is precisely how, according to these sources, the combat map was adjusted over the past 24 hours. According to incoming information, Russian forces have managed to establish full control over a fairly extensive and fortified system of strongpoints in this area, and have moved right up to Novoyakovlivka. In addition, based on various geolocation data and video materials, it is evident that light aviation assets as well as FPV drone operators are actively operating against two key forest belts. This, in turn, indicates the intention of the Russian Federation to expand its zone of control around these strongpoints and continue further advances. Novoyakovlivka, in this context, may become a kind of turning point for the entire Orikhiv offensive. If Russian units manage to enter the settlement quickly enough and force Ukrainian formations to retreat further to the east, this will be an unequivocal confirmation that in the very near future the pace of the advance toward the city of Orikhiv will only intensify. Moreover, it cannot be ruled out that the offensive will develop along several axes at once, including toward the settlements of Yurkivka and Buryakivka. We will closely monitor how the situation develops in this area. If we move on to the eastern Zaporizhzhia direction, combat operations continue in the area of the notional triangle of Huliai-Pol, Stara Ukrainka, Zhelezniknaya. According to pro-Russian sources, over the past 24 hours, the Ukrainian side carried out a series of counterattacks, the main objective of which was to attempt to re-establish a foothold in the settlement of Huliai-Pol and reach its western outskirts. At the same time, Russian sources claimed that all attacks by the armed forces of Ukraine were successfully repelled. Meanwhile, in recent days, almost no information has been coming in regarding the settlement of Ternavate. Most likely, this is due to the fact that the Ukrainian side managed to stabilize the situation by redeploying reinforcements. This settlement is strategically important, since its loss could open a corridor for Russian forces to advance further west, potentially toward the Zaporizhzhia direction. However, for approximately the past 2 to 3 weeks, virtually no news has been coming from this section of the front. This creates the impression that at a certain point, the Russian side reduced its level of active operations, and the intensity of the fighting noticeably declined. It cannot be ruled out that unfavorable weather conditions were one of the reasons for this operational pause. Next, we move to the area of Pokrovsk, Mirnohrad, and Dobropilya, that is, the Dobropilya sector of the line of contact. A particularly large amount of significant information is coming from this direction today. Pro-Ukrainian sources have introduced another set of changes to their maps, and at this point even Ukrainian cartographers have almost completely marked the settlement of Mirnohrad as being under the control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. According to the updated configuration, the city is now effectively divided into 2 zones: a grey zone and territory controlled by Russian units. There are also reports that the Russian army has expanded its area of presence around Olympiyska Street. This is how the map was adjusted over the past 24 hours. Russian units are attempting to develop their advance from this area in a northwestern direction, toward the settlement of Shevchenko. This area contains a fairly strong network of fortified positions, through which the Ukrainian side still retains the ability to redeploy its units, first toward a small spoil heap of the Zaporizhzhia mine, and from there into the central part of the settlement of Rodinske. For this reason, the main movement is currently taking place from the direction of Olympiyska Street. In the longer term, this advance should provide Russian units in Rodinske with flank cover, as well as significantly reduce the logistical capacity and transit capabilities between Rodinske and Shevchenko. In addition, early this morning, or possibly late the previous evening, Ukrainian sources published extremely important video footage related to combat operations directly within the settlement of Rodinske. We will not analyze this video in detail, but it contains at least around 10 separate episodes showing Ukrainian soldiers raising flags in the central part of Rodinske, closer to the route between the settlement itself, the T-0515 highway, and the Yaitai direction toward Belitske. Notably, these images appear to be recent, as the footage was recorded at a time when Rodinske was already covered with a thick layer of snow. This provides grounds to believe that the video is indeed current. Based on these materials of objective control, another adjustment to the situation in the central part of Rodinske has been made. Thus, it cannot be ruled out that the Ukrainian side carried out a counterattack, and that fighting for this settlement is currently ongoing. As for the Kostiantynivka sector of the front, no significant changes have been recorded there as of today. The Russian side continues to actively strike Ukrainian armed forces positions using a large number of drones, effectively maintaining constant pressure over the city, but without any noticeable forward movement. Let me remind you that the main task of the Russian army in this direction is to fully straighten the front line along the N32 highway, running from Mirnohrad and Pokrovsk toward Bakhmut, Chasiv Yar, and further on, up to directions north of Donetsk and toward Siversk. Next, we move on to the Sloviansk sector of the front. Offensive operations here have not stopped. At present, the map shows minor but important adjustments, some of which relate to the area around the M03 highway. This is how the map has been changing over the past several days. We can see that the Russian army is operating quite actively. There is growing evidence that Russian units are advancing toward Fedorivka II, Debrova, Perevilia, Holubivka, as well as Nikiforivka. Heavy and intense fighting is currently underway in this area. In addition, Russian forces are gradually advancing along the Sviato-Pokrovsky, Reznikivka, Kaliniki line. The map in this sector has also been undergoing changes for several days now. Thus, Russian units continue an active offensive. Part of the territory is marked as a grey zone, but there are also geolocation confirmations of the presence of Russian units, at least within this forested area. At the same time, fierce meeting engagements continue along the Dobrovo-Ozern line. Today, some cartographic sources report that the Ukrainian side carried out a counterattack, as a result of which part of the settlement of Dobrovo temporarily came under the control of the armed forces of Ukraine. At present, this territory should be correctly marked as a grey zone. At the same time, information is coming in that Russian units managed to close the so-called pocket in the northern part of Ozern and establish full control over this strongpoint, which is quite significant and located along a key supply route. Additionally, reports indicate that Russian units have begun a gradual advance toward the T-0514 road, which connects Lyman with the settlement of Sloviansk. Apparently, the goal of these actions is to physically cut this transport artery, establish control over it, and thereby deprive the Ukrainian armed forces of another supply line actively used for military purposes. Ukrainian sources also complain that the Russian army is systematically striking all crossings over the Siversky Donets River. As a result, we are gradually observing how the pincers around Lyman and Drobyshev are tightening. Most likely, a certain turning point in this confrontation may occur in this area in the near future. If we move to the Kupiansk sector of the front, the situation there remains largely unchanged. Only one small video has appeared confirming the presence of Russian units in part of the settlement of Kurilivka. Let me remind you that the day before, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation reported progress in the area of the settlement of Podoli. But as of the end of January 5th, not a single video had been published that could unequivocally confirm this information. Apparently, the advance of Russian units in this direction continues, but fighting on the western bank of the Oskil River has noticeably subsided. At least its intensity has significantly decreased. At the same time, the most important and sensitive news today is coming from the border areas. The Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation officially confirmed information that Russian units managed to advance in the area of the settlement of Hrobovsky. Based on the published footage, no additional map corrections are being made, since reports of progress in this area had appeared several days earlier. Today, this information was simply reaffirmed at the official level. It cannot be ruled out that additional objective control video materials will appear in the near future. In addition, some neutral cartographers confirm that starting from late December 2025, the Russian army indeed carried out a series of strike operations in this sector of the front. This concerns the Nekrolovets, Berezovy, and Hlukiv directions. It was here that Russian units crossed the state border near the settlement of Kharkivka, as well as near Komarivka. However, Ukrainian and neutral sources report that the Ukrainian side regrouped fairly quickly and launched counterattacks. As a result, in the Kharkivka area, Russian units were forced to withdraw back across the state border. In the area of the settlement of Komarivka, however, fighting appears to have broken out, and Russian forces are currently attempting to entrench themselves in the positions they have reached. It is possible that additional information from this section of the front will emerge in the near future.